My Travels in the Spirit World by Carolyn D. Larsen, 1927. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC, September 2018. Introduction. Now, when speculation and research concerning life after death are arousing more interest in the public mind than at any other time in human history, it seems peculiarly fitting that I should publish my travels in the spirit world. So far, every attempt to lift the curtain that separates us from the realm of spirits has been carried on through a medium. But in this little book, I shall describe scenes of the spirit world which I have witnessed with my own eyes, and I shall relate conversations with spirits in which I have actually taken part. I have been enabled to tell you of these marvelous occurrences by virtue of my ability to leave my physical body and to live, for the time being, in the astral, the power of being a spirit, though there has been no actual physical death. So, because of my additional ability to reason and reflect on the meaning of all I saw and heard, as well as the power to retain it in memory, I have garnered the knowledge of the life hereafter which I now present to the public, a knowledge which must be considered as first-hand evidence on the subject, a knowledge obtained, I believe, by the only process possible to mortals. This ability to detach oneself from the material and to live in the astral is not a power peculiar to me. There are many records of a similar facility. In my case, however, disassociation from the material was purely involuntary. As the reader will discover by reading the opening chapter of the book, I did not seek or foster any such power. It possessed me unawares. Furthermore, I do not claim any superiority or supernatural gift. Because of my unlooked-for power, I regard it merely as a facility, an additional power which some persons happen to possess. One hears little of revelations by virtue of such a power because those who have it pay no attention to it, or they suppress it altogether. To my readers, I commend the results of my observations of the life hereafter, for I believe that even to those who will not see fit to accept them as credible, they will at least prove to be of more than ephemeral interest. As for myself, I have no doubt what I have seen and experienced is real, very real. Nothing in all of my life has made such a lasting and vivid impression upon my mind. And I am positive that no traveler could be more certain of the reality of his experiences than I am of the reality of my spirit travels. I do not claim to have seen all of the life of the spirit world. In fact, I've only seen a very little of it, but I am sure that I have seen something of each of its multifarious phases. At least, my experiences have been so varied that my readers will be able to obtain a reasonably broad conception of the conditions which will confront us when we leave our present sphere. If my account should be found somewhat disjointed, the cause must be attributed to my refusal to elaborate or pad my material. I am determined to relate only those occurrences which I actually experienced in these strange adventures of mine. This being my only object, I am convinced that the reader will not be unduly severe in criticizing this little volume for its lack of literary value or for any other of its shortcomings. Christine D. Larsen. My first experience out of the body. In the fall of 1910, while living in Burlington, Vermont, I had, one evening, retired rather early. In addition to the usual thoughts running through my mind, I was much interested in listening to the music floating up from downstairs where my husband, who is a violinist, was rehearsing a string quartet for a coming local concert. The musicians were playing a quartet by Beethoven, my favorite composer. I was enjoying the music exceedingly, regretting that my pleasure was occasionally marred not only by the playing of the second violinist, a young Frenchman, who, although a very good amateur, had the misfortune of playing out of tune every now and then, but also by the too loud playing of the cellist, a local merchant. I had been enjoying Beethoven for some time in spite of the faults of these two players, when suddenly I underwent a very strange experience. A feeling of deep oppression and apprehension came over me, not unlike that which precedes a fainting spell. I braced myself against it, but to no avail. The overpowering oppression deepened, and soon numbness crept over me until every muscle became paralyzed. In this condition I remained for some time. My mind, however, was still working as clearly as ever. At first I heard the music plainly, but soon the sounds began to slip away from me by degrees, until finally everything became a blank, and I was unconscious to life and the world. How long this state lasted I do not know. What happened during this period I am also unable to relate. The next thing I knew was that I, myself, was standing on the floor beside my bed, looking down attentively at my own physical body lying in it. I recognized every line in that familiar face, pale and still as death, the features drawn, the eyes tightly closed, and the mouth partly open. The arms and hands rested limp and lifeless beside the body. I gazed at that material form of mine for a few moments while mingled feelings passed over me. Strangely enough, they were not feelings of great surprise. I experienced no shock at finding myself in this peculiar situation. It was chiefly curiosity that possessed my mind. I was perfectly calm and composed as I viewed the mortal form I had just previously inhabited. I now raised my eyes from my body and looked around the room. Everything appeared to me as natural as ever. There was the little table with books and trinkets on it. There was the bureau, the dresser, the big armchair, the smaller chairs, green carpet on the floor, the red wallpaper with its patterns of urns and flowers, those figures which I had often counted over when sleepless. And there was the little, partly shaded electric lamp which lighted my bedroom, burning as usual. While my eyes observed these familiar objects, the music from downstairs kept floating up to my ears. I glanced once more at my body, which to all appearances seemed dead. Then I turned and I walked slowly towards the door, passed through it, and into a hall that led to the bathroom. As I walked towards that room, past the stairway, I heard the music coming up with increased force, and I delighted in the lovely adagio from Beethoven's Opera 127 Quartet, a special favorite of mine. As I entered the bathroom, the strains gradually diminished in volume. I now approached a large mirror hanging above the washbowl. Through force of habit, I went through the motions of turning on the electric light, which of course I did not actually turn on. But there was no need for illumination, for from my body and face emanated a strong whitish light that lighted up the room brilliantly. Looking into the mirror, I became aware for the first time of the astonishing transformation I had undergone. Instead of seeing a middle-aged woman, I beheld the figure of a girl about 18 years of age. I recognized the form and features of my girlhood, but I was now infinitely more beautiful. My face appeared as if it were chiseled out of the finest alabaster, and it seemed transparent, as did my arms and hands when I raised them to touch my hair. It seemed as if I could see through them, but they were not entirely translucent, for in the center of the arms and hands and fingers there was a darker, more compact substance, as in X-ray photographs. My eyes, quite strong in the physical body, were piercingly keen now. They shone with such luster that the mirror reflected their penetrating beams. My hair, no longer gray, was now, as in my youth, dark brown, and it fell in waves over my shoulders and down my back. And to my delight, I was dressed in the loveliest white shining garment imaginable, a sleeveless one-piece dress, cut low at the neck and reaching almost to the ankles. I looked down at my legs and saw that they were as beautiful as my arms, neck, and face. I walked forward and backward before the mirror, reveling in my newly found beauty. When I looked myself full in the face, I became almost frightened at the strength and brilliancy of my eyes. I raised my hands before my face and closed and opened the fingers. They seemed so airy and delicate, yet I felt no lack of strength in them, and no change of sensation in moving them. My joy and enthusiasm were unbounded at seeing myself so beautiful. Eagerly I drank in the glory. It was also an exhilarating sensation to be conscious of the fact that I was out of my physical body and that I lived in the astral. This realization never once left me. During the time that I was occupied before the mirror, I had followed, more or less carelessly, the music from the quartet, but now I forgot my vanity and listened attentively. Suddenly I heard the strains of Mendelssohn's violin concerto. I knew at once that the Frenchman was playing the solo. It was a habit he always indulged while the music was being changed on the stands, but as always he played it out of tune. As usual, I felt disgusted, and for the moment, forgetting all about myself, I muttered angrily, "Oh, I wish my husband would tell that Frenchman to play that concerto in tune or not play it at all." Fortunately, the quartet now began to play again, and the soothing music of Beethoven calmed me. Once more I turned to admire myself in the mirror. Not being content to enjoy my beauty alone, I wished that others might see it and share with me the joy. A block away from us lived a Miss B., a friend of mine, who had often complimented me on my taste in dressing and on my general appearance. I conceived the notion that I would go to her and show myself. "Won't she be astonished?" I said to myself. "If she complimented me before, what will she say now? But first," I reflected, "I will go down and present myself to my husband and the other men." I thought with amusement of the expression that would sweep across their astonished faces. I did not fancy that, had I succeeded in getting up to Miss B. or down to my husband and the other musicians, none of them would have been able to see me at all, unless perchance some of them possessed the ability to see me as a ghost. No sooner had I conceived this intention than I proceeded to carry it out. Turning away from the mirror, I walked out into the hall. Enjoying in anticipation the success of my plan, I stepped on gaily. I revelled in the feeling of bodily lightness. While in the physical body one has to move the legs with conscious effort, now I moved with the freedom of thought. It was a delightful sensation. No one could be happier than I when I began the descent of the stairway. The Beethoven music sounded lovelier than ever. It increased in force as I advanced step by step. But alas, my pleasant plan was not to be realized, and my hopes of exciting admiration and wonder were to be dashed to the ground. Just as I came to the little platform which divides the stairway into two flights, I saw, standing before me, a woman spirit in shining clothes, with arms outstretched and with fingers pointing upwards. There was a look of strong determination on her face as she spoke to me sternly. "Where are you going? Go back to your body." Whether it was that, on this my first experience out of my body, I was not to be permitted to enjoy more than this short trial, or that I had broken unwittingly some rule governing such experience, I knew instinctively that from this spirit's command and authority there was no appeal. I must obey. Reluctantly, I turned, ascended the stairs, walked through the hall into my bedroom, and up to my bed. My physical body lay there as still and lifeless as when I left it. I viewed it with feelings of loathing and disappointment. I knew that I would soon have to enter it again, no matter how ugly it seemed to me, or however much I shrank from it. The music rising from below also helped to sadden my spirit, in that it reminded me of my failure to present myself before my husband in my changed form. But no time was left for me for reflections. In another instant I had again joined with my physical form. With a gasp and a start, I woke up in it. Somewhat confused at first, I soon regained my usual composure of mind, and there the strange experience I had just passed through stood before me in all its vividness. I was now in a position to confirm, through personal knowledge, the truth of the possibility that one can leave the physical body, taste life in the astral, and return again to the earthly form. Now I heard the music once more through my mortal ears, but soon the rehearsal ended. When I related to my husband the story of my supernatural experience, and we compared notes as to what had occurred downstairs, that which I had heard with my astral ears agreed to the smallest details with what he told me had taken place at the rehearsal. This was my first experience out of the body. But since then, I have often been accorded the privilege. I have traveled far and wide in space, visited heavenly bodies, visited many parts of the spirit world, where I have seen and heard things which I believe have never been given to the world. In the preceding description of my first experience out of the body, it will be remembered that I was confined to the limits of my home. For some unknown reason, a woman's spirit prevented me from leaving the house. But as time went on and these experiences continued, I was gradually allowed more and more liberty, and soon I wandered rather widely about. At first I traveled only through my immediate neighborhood, but as I gained experience in handling myself in the astral, I took more extensive trips, which covered the greater part of the earth. In these trips, I gathered a complete knowledge of the spirit existence immediately after death. How they live, how they act and think. Let me say in passing that most spirits, until they gravitate to their proper realm, remain for a time in the environment where they spent their earthly life. Then, with the aid of guides, I was permitted extensive travels into the greater realm of the spirits, where I learned about the conditions governing their future existence, observed spirit existence in all its diverse forms of life. Finally, most remarkable of all, I was granted the unusual privilege of a trip into the very abyss of space to witness the wonderful spectacle of the universe ablaze with life. If all of the information concerning life hereafter which I gathered on these occasions could become generally accepted, the present dread of so-called death would entirely disappear. Our grief and despair at the loss of our loved ones would change into a calm resignation in the face of the conviction that, as the dead are more alive than ever, the separation is but momentary, the reunion is close at hand. Without further preliminaries, I shall begin my narrative of life after death. I shall divide my story into 3 parts. First, I shall describe the manner of life here on earth immediately after death. Secondly, I shall picture life in the real realms of the spirits. And finally, I shall give my observations of the surging life which fills the entire universe. Spirit life on earth. The phrase, "there is no death," used through ages for the consolation of mourning relatives and friends, is actually and literally true. For no sooner has the physical body been stilled in death than out of that mortal form, now of no more avail to him, steps the personality which had so recently inhabited it and used it for his manifestations in this life. He now stands in the full glow of another existence, having exchanged his short and limited life in the prison of earthly clay for life eternal and infinite in possibility. A human being may be said to be composed of three distinct parts. First, the ego, the real I, the actual personality, or, to employ a better understood term, the soul, which resides in an astral body, which again is encased in the physical body. When death overtakes the mortal form, the spirit continues life in the new body. Hence, there is no death as far as that personality is concerned. There is only transmutation from one form of life to another. Materially minded as we are, we're apt to think of this change as something vague with no real foundation to it. We see a graphic instance of this common error in the illustrated papers, where the spirit is often depicted as a spiral column of smoke, at the top of which appears the picture of a strangely distorted human face. Nothing could be further from the truth than this misrepresentation. A disembodied spirit appears, feels, thinks, and acts just exactly as I did in my first experience out of the body. The spirit body, which in form and appearance is an exact duplicate of the material body, is composed of a substance as fine as the material body is coarse. Its fine substance is attuned to vibrations whose rapidity our bodily senses can't perceive. Moreover, to the spirit, the astral body feels just as natural and substantial as did the material body when it was inhabited. When I stood before the mirror in the bathroom and admired the appearance of my new body, I felt just as real as I felt when I was inside the mortal form that was lying on the bed in the other room. As I clenched and unclenched my hand, as I turned around, as I walked through the hall, I felt power and vitality surging through every part of the body. There were no new, terrifying sensations. The only perceptible change was a strange, rather delightful lightness and buoyancy. Not only are all of the sensations of the former body, sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, present in the new body, but they have become greatly intensified. The spirit sees everything in the material life as well as everything in the spirit life. But in the spirit life there are not the limitations of vision characteristic of the material life. As with the spirit eyes, so with the spirit ear. It can detect sounds that would completely elude the material ear. In like manner, the other senses are growing keener. To my astral ears, the sounds of music from downstairs took on a new beauty. I had never before known such clarity and delicacy. Moreover, with my astral eyes, I perceived my surroundings with clearness and vividness previously unknown. Furthermore, I could stand up in the bathroom and see clearly my husband and the other 3 men downstairs through all the intervening material barriers. But though the senses, by an increased susceptibility, react to the change from material to astral, the mind undergoes no transmutation whatsoever, except to take on the added facility of being capable of reading others' thoughts. One wakes in the astral as one left the material. So far as my state of mind was concerned, I was merely continuing earthly existence. So with all spirits. Many of them, because of this condition of mind, together with the natural feeling of their astral body, are deluded into believing that they still live in the material, and that they endeavor to carry on life as they had always done. Nor does memory suffer in the passing over. In the astral, I could remember every detail of my past material life. I was perfectly aware of my own identity. I knew exactly what had transpired up to the time when I assumed the astral. Such is the case with spirits. This fact was often demonstrated to me by conversations with spirits whom I had known in earth life. They too were able to recall even certain trivial details of their past existence with which we were both familiar. In the spirit world, there is no age. The astral body cannot grow old, hence there is no senility. When a spirit arrives in the astral world, he assumes the appearance characteristic of the full bloom of his manhood. Children entering the spirit life grow in the astral body until they reach maturity. As the astral body is an exact copy of the physical, so men and women remain men and women in the spirit world. All their characteristics and peculiar masculine and feminine qualities remain unchanged. Spirits, like humans, wear garments. That is, an unalterable regulation in the spirit world. No spirit can ever appear without covering. The appearance of clothes is effected in the following manner. From every spirit emanates a strong aura, a pseudo-phosphoric light. This aura is completely controlled by the mind. Out of this substance is molded the vesture of the body. At first, right after death, the molding, in most cases, is an unconscious act. For no sooner is a spirit separated from the physical body than it is in some manner dressed, even though the garment be only a sort of a shroud. But as the mind gains control of itself, the act of dressing becomes a conscious act, and the fashion of the wearing apparel is largely governed by the individual's taste. Hence, just after death, when the mind is still completely dominated by earthly ideals and habits, the spirits generally affect the fashions of the clothes which were worn previous to passing over. So, the first thing to catch my eye in my first wandering in the astral was the strange spectacle of spirits who appeared as mortals in earthly raiment, walking everywhere. In the spirit world, the color of the aura defines the quality of the spirit. All darker colors denote a low state of development. As the spirit progresses upwards, the colors of the aura become continually brighter. These aura colors, of course, determine also the color of the spirit garment. Hence, the character, quality, and development of the spirit is denoted by the color of the garment. Some of the departed spirits are at once fully aware that they are able to reflect on their condition just as I was able to reflect on mine. Other spirits suspect dimly that something strange has overtaken them, but they refuse absolutely to accept the realization, and in order to shut it out more completely out of their minds, they deliberately continue their familiar activity of the world, thus with their minds ill-attuned to their conditions. They seem unable to reason clearly about their state until, by slow degrees, they are adjusted to it. The majority of spirits, however, are in so confused a state of mind that they do not suspect at all the great change they have undergone. No sooner are they out of their earthly form than they proceed at once to live their life along the old, familiar lines. The businessman immediately starts for his office to direct affairs, wondering constantly at the delay in the execution of his orders. The traveler, laden with baggage, as he thinks, looks out for the train which shall carry him on his usual route. The judge places himself on the bench ready to listen to the pleas, but somehow matters do not concur to his satisfaction. The lawyer hunts for his client, but either he's unable to find him or he makes no connection with the proper courtroom. The professor eagerly lectures his class and wonders angrily why the class does not pay him the customary attention. The hostess anxiously attempts to gather her guests together for the party she had planned, but success does not crown her efforts. The mechanic and the worker trot cheerfully to their places of work, but nothing seems to go right. Here some spirits will enter their accustomed stores to purchase something, only to lose sight of the clerk or to discover that they've forgotten the money wherewith to effect the purchase. Others will enter the old familiar restaurant, sit down at a table, and give the waiter the order for their favorite dishes, but they find the waiter so disrespectful that he either ignores them completely or fails to bring the desired food. Disgusted with such service, they leave the place to try elsewhere, but a similar result greets every effort. So they all continue in their diverse customary activities of earthly life, only to find constantly some inexplicable barriers existing between them and their desires. They live as in that dream in which one attempts accustomed actions, only to find oneself bewilderingly baffled in every futile attempt. They are filled with surprise that relatives and friends ignore them, and that their usual aims fail completely. Yet no one attempts to disillusion them. First of all, it's not permitted to do that, as the sudden shock of such information volunteered to an ignorant spirit would have disastrous results. And furthermore, most spirits would not listen to such talk. They would stoutly and angrily deny that there was anything unusual the matter with them. Therefore, at first, there is no questioning, and everyone must, there, as here, dispel his own illusions and slowly formulate his own ideas, for the mind suffers no change in death. Everywhere in my journeys I found these new citizens of Spirit Land thronging the streets of cities, passing in and out of houses, traveling on trains and voyaging on steamers. In fact, wherever mortals habitate, there are to be found also denizens of the spirit world. So in reality, there are as many spirits inhabiting this earth as there are mortals. It was a strange sight to me, able as I was to reflect on the strangeness of the situation, to look down a busy street and to see spirits and mortals intermingling with one another. Occasionally I would follow into the houses spirits I had known in the flesh. They would lie down on the bed they'd always used, recline on the couch which had so often been a comfort to them, take the usual seat in the easy chair and occupy the old familiar place at the table, but there was always a troubled expression on their faces, because none of those whom they had loved seemed to recognize them. Restless, they would rise and wander aimlessly out among the crowd in search of something or somebody that could be of some assistance to clear up the mystery. I often talked with such spirits, as well as those who understood the truth of the situation. In almost every instance, however, they spoke first and then approached me. I shall relate some of these incidents and conversations, as they're both interesting and a help in understanding the condition of the spirit mind. At one time, a Mrs. C., a pleasant acquaintance of earth life, approached me. She was conscious of having passed over. With a gentle smile, she said to me, "I saw your kind feelings for me, and I realized how you mourned for me when I died, and I thank you so much for the beautiful roses you sent me," meaning to her funeral. "If I had known and seen what I do now, things would have been different." She was referring to some misunderstanding between us that had been caused by the jealous talk of some of her relatives. Having said this to me, she went on her way. I did not reply, but I felt very pleased. She was a beautiful spirit. Her aura was bright and her dress white. This denoted spiritual development. Another friend, Miss M., was present in her own home when her funeral was going on. I had wandered there out of curiosity. Her mind was very confused and she seemed dazed. She did not realize that she had passed on. Hence she did not comprehend that it was her own body that had been laid out in the coffin. She evidently knew that her parents were grieving sadly because of her. She tried frantically to make them understand that she was right there and everything was well. Very much puzzled that her parents so completely ignored her, she walked up to me and in a very excited manner inquired, "What is all this fuss about? I'm here. I could not utter a word to set her right about her condition, as it is impossible to volunteer such information to a spirit who has just passed over. Such knowledge must come to them through their own efforts by slow degrees. Finding she could get no assistance from me, my friend turned abruptly and left the house in great distress. One man I met made a good impression on me. He'd been my lawyer in Denmark for many years. He was a man of splendid qualities and sterling character. In addition to being my lawyer, he was also a man whom I was proud to call a friend. After I came to America, he had faithfully taken care of my affairs in the old country, but suddenly his letters stopped. Although I had never been informed of his decease, I felt certain that he must have died, for I knew that otherwise he would never have failed me. To my great delight, in one of my wanderings, this friend, Rosengard by name, came right up in front of me. With eyes smiling in sincere friendship, he looked steadily at me for a while. It did not take me long to recognize him, although when I last saw him on earth he was a man of 60 years, and now he was as he had been in the full bloom of his manhood. "Do you remember me?" he spoke up. "That when you left Denmark I promised you that whatever happened and wherever you were, I should always stand by you faithfully? I kept that promise," he continued, "until I could do so no longer. For when your last letter came, I had already passed over, and that was the reason why you never received any answer." I knew before he had finished that he had spoken the truth and had acted honorably with me in every way, as a true friend should. With the same kind smile still playing on his face, he turned and left me as soon as he had delivered his message. In much joy over having met my good friend under such conditions, I stood for a moment watching him disappear. He seemed to be in fairly good condition spiritually, as his aura was quite bright. But since he had not been over there very long, he still adorned himself in the fashion he had always followed, namely, a cutaway suit with the customary striped trousers. Our meeting proved that true friendship exists, and it lasts beyond the grave. One woman spirit whom I came across, a Mrs. B., was still ignorant of the fact that she had left earth life. Her mind was full of anger and bitterness because she had found that her husband's professed love through a long married life had been false. "Now," she says, "he lives with a woman who squanders all I helped him to save." I was not interested in hearing any more, and I quickly departed from her. I had a rather amusing experience with a man spirit who in earth life had been very prominent in society, in business, literature, and art. This Mr. H. I had grown to know very well because of mutual interests which he and my husband possessed. Both of us had been on very friendly terms with him, as well as with his family. Although I had always highly respected this man, I had nursed a certain antipathy for him. This feeling made itself felt again in spirit life. Just as I was crossing an open field, I became aware that someone was treading closely upon my heels. Turning around, whom should I see but my old friend Mr. H., eagerly watching and following me. Although he had been a very old man when he died, he now appeared young. But I had no difficulty in recognizing him. Strangely enough, he still wore his customary gray sack suit. As soon as I had recognized him, I quickly and with determination turned my head, quickened my steps, and walked straight away. However, this snub of mine did not seem to deter him, because he kept following me. So it went on for quite a while. Finally, I crossed over into a garden where I sat down on a bench, thinking that my unwelcome companion must now be quite ashamed of himself, and that he would leave me. But I was mistaken. He walked right to the bench and took a seat on the other end. Bending forward and with eyes twinkling, he looked at me full in the face, evidently intent on making me regret my coolness, and probably hoping that I would condescend to speak to him. But this appealing action of his did not soften my mood. I sat cold and indifferent as a statue. At last he began to speak. "We were well acquainted and friendly in earthly life. Why can't we continue amicably here?" But without deigning to reply, I rose up haughtily and walked away with grave dignity. For a while my friend followed me, but soon I discovered that he had disappeared. I met and recognized a woman spirit who on earth had been a royal queen of modern times. She had enjoyed much power and wide popularity in earth life. Her present life contrasted drably with her former existence. Although her aura was of a fairly bright hue, she had adorned herself in the simplest possible way, with a kind of shroud that covered her head and body. How different from her royal splendor on earth! She walked around in seemingly stunned bewilderment, ignorant of having passed over. Her power was gone, and no attention was paid to her. She simply could not understand her present predicament. Her state of mind seemed so confused and dazed that thinking was impossible. She did not notice me. I simply watched her for a while, out of curiosity. In strong contrast to the appearance and condition of this royal personage was the bearing of another queen who on earth had been greatly beloved for her kindness and generous deeds which had filled her long life. I met her in that palace where she had always lived. She had stayed there until now because, as I understand it, she had evidently not yet completely disassociated herself from her past life of well-doing. She confided to me, "There is some little work yet I would have liked to have done, and am sorry I did not get it finished." It was delightful to be near such a lovely spirit. Her aura was very bright, and she was clad in a pure white dress of beautiful design. I had the feeling that this noble spirit would not stay much longer there, but that she would gravitate to the spirit regions where she would fit in better, and where she would be given opportunity to continue her noble work, thus furthering the development so well started in earth life. I received a different impression from the appearance of her husband, the former king, who came into the palace while I was with her. His aura was not bright. Indeed, it tended to be dark. He was dressed in a frock coat with striped trousers. He did not seem to realize fully the conditions under which he lived. He carried himself with royal dignity and seemed rather surprised to see me with his queen. The one thing that he instinctively realized was evidently the benefit which he might derive from association with the lovely spirit that was once his queen. But in a kind yet firm manner she refused him the privilege of staying near her. With seemingly wounded dignity he went from us with heavy steps, and soon I left the presence of the former queen. A terrible state of mind was evidenced by the spirit of a young boy who, on passing, sneered at me, "I will split your head open and let your brains out," he said, casting a frightful, malicious look upon me. This boy had just passed over in the midst of awful crimes. He still believed himself in the flesh, and evidently wished to continue his devilish pleasures. His color was very dark. Fortunately, the laws governing spirit life restrain one spirit from promiscuous interference with another spirit. If such were not the case, this boy would have carried on his fiendish crimes in the spirit world as well as on earth. The following incident was extremely interesting to me, because I actually witnessed the personality pass in and out of the physical body in question several times, and then finally leave it. Mr. G was well known to both my husband and myself, although it could not be said that we were on friendly terms with him. He was a man who indulged liberally in liquor, a failing which mastered him time and again. Through some special trouble, not necessary to state here, he lost his head completely and started a career of drink and dope to which he finally succumbed. On the night he died, I happened to be out in my spirit body. Passing his home, I went in. In the bed lay Mr. G, in terrible convulsions, caused by an overdose of dope and liquor. Beside his bed stood two men who, I knew, were also trying to do something for him, and this was later verified through the effort of my husband. Suddenly, I saw Mr. G rise up in his astral body and step out entirely from his physical counterpart. At once he started an eager and thorough search all around the bed for a half-filled bottle of whiskey and a small bottle of narcotics which he had secreted. He found them and endeavored to lift them to his mouth. Failing in this, an expression of chagrin spread over his face. Then he went up to his body, and swiftly he connected with it once more. In a short while he again stepped out of his mortal form, only to go through the same performance. This he did several times, and it was strange to observe that every time he left his body it became still in death, and that as soon as he connected with it, it writhed in fearful convulsions. Finally, he came out for the last time, and just as he started to look for the bottles again, he suddenly caught sight of me. Straightening up, he looked me full in the eyes with an expression of stupefied surprise. Then, turning away, he staggered out of the house completely confused in his mind, and ignorant of the fact that he had left behind his physical form, which he was never to inhabit again. It was significant that each time that he stepped out of his body, his aura instantly covered him with a dress similar to a sack suit that he always wore, but it was of a brown color, denoting the lack of any spiritual development. End of part 1.